Okay, so today's lesson is all about anaerobic respiration, and we're going to start off by having a look at a starter question. So if you've either printed this out or you can just look at it on the screen, it doesn't really matter. So this is a bit of a recap from last lesson. So we've got, in an investigation, 4 groups of athletes were studied. The maximum rate of oxygen consumption for each athlete was measured and the mean for each group was calculated. The athletes then ran 10-mile races and the mean of the best times was calculated for each group. The results are shown in the table below. So we've got athletes A, B, C and D. Their maximum oxygen consumption, and that is in centimetres cubed per kilogram per minute. And then the best time they ran their 10-mile race in minutes. Very simple 1-mark question to start with. What is the relationship between maximum rate of oxygen consumption and time for a 10-mile race? So I suggest you pause the video, write down an answer, and then we will carry on and look at the second part. So the first part was quite easy. The second part is slightly more complicated. It's worth 3 marks. Can we suggest an explanation for this relationship? So again, I suggest you pause the video, write down your answer, and then we will check the answers after you have written something down. So what were the answers? Let's go back and have a look at the first part of the question again. So what's the relationship between maximum rate of oxygen consumption and time for a 10-mile race? So basically we can see that as their oxygen consumption increases, their time to complete the 10-mile race decreases. So if we look at the mark scheme, it says the higher the rate of oxygen consumption, the shorter the time taken to complete. You can also express that in the opposite, so the alternative relationship, so the lower the rate of oxygen consumption, the longer the time taken the race. And now suggest an explanation for this relationship. So we've got here this relationship here, the faster oxygen taken into the blood. Remember, they were talking in the table about oxygen consumption. So the faster they take it into the blood, if you go back and have a look at the table, it's in centimetres cubed per kilogram per minute. So it's a rate. So the faster it's taken into the blood, the faster energy can be released in the muscles and the faster the athlete can run. So make your corrections if you didn't quite get all of those marks. We're going to have a look at, say, anaerobic respiration. These are our objectives and our outcomes. We're going to talk about why muscles respire anaerobically during vigorous exercise, why less energy is released by anaerobic respiration, and then we're going to have a look at the difference between anaerobic respiration in animals or mammals versus plants, and yeast as well, and why this is important. But first we're going to recap on last lesson on aerobic respiration. So aerobic respiration, remember, is not breathing. It's a chemical process. It happens in the cells, and its key thing is to release energy from the chemical energy that's stored in glucose. Right, and basically if we involve oxygen, it is aerobic respiration. It's very efficient and it supplies lots of energy to the whole body, and that energy is used for things like active transport, like we did, you looked at in the last lesson, putting molecules together, breaking molecules down. It's involved in muscle contraction for movement. It's very efficient. Okay, so we release carbon dioxide and water through this process, and overall, if we look at this as a word, in words, aerobic respiration is a chemical reaction that takes place in all living cells in which glucose reacts with oxygen, produces carbon dioxide and water, and stored chemical energy is released. It happens in the mitochondria, and it happens in all cells all of the time. As soon as your cells stop respiring aerobically, you're dead, basically. Okay, so that is the equation in words and in symbols. Now I haven't balanced this equation because I feel that that's something you should have a go at yourselves, but just to remind you, it's fairly straightforward to balance this equation. You just pop a 6 in front of the O2, a 6 in front of the CO2, and a 6 in front of the H2O. You must know all of these 4 chemical formulae, okay, particularly C6H12O6 for glucose. Some of you, in some of the work you've been submitting, we haven't been writing CO2 properly. We've been writing CO squared. That's not a thing. All right, please remember it's CO2. All right, and again, this happens in the cells, in the mitochondria. Glucose goes in from the blood, oxygen goes in from the blood, carbon dioxide and water are released back into the blood, and the energy is used by the cells. Now, the carbon dioxide travels back to the lungs and is breathed out along with a lot of the water. Some of the water is also released via sweat and via urine. Okay, so that is where we're up to with aerobic respiration. Now we're going to have a look at anaerobic respiration. Hopefully, you may or may not know there are two types of anaerobic respiration. One happens in humans, or all animals essentially, and one happens in yeast and plants as well. But we're going to look at it from the point of view of yeast today. And we're going to start off by looking at it in humans. So, this is what is going on the majority of the time in your body. Glucose and oxygen are being chemically combined. They're releasing carbon dioxide and water and energy. And that energy, as I said earlier, is being used within the cells for the cell processes. All right. But if you are doing strenuous exercise, so you are sprinting, okay, or you are doing a very high intensity exercise for a very short period of time, your body cannot get enough oxygen to the cells for aerobic respiration to take place. So, what does it do? Basically, what that means is you're not going to get as much energy as your cells require. So, if you can't get enough energy, and there's no energy going to be released, you're not going to carry out any of the chemical processes that the cells need to. So, what it does is temporarily, for a short period of time, it respires anaerobically. So it respires without oxygen. And when it respires without oxygen, it breaks down the glucose into lactic acid. This releases some energy, a tiny amount of energy, in compared to aerobic respiration, but enough to tide the body over until it can go back to respiring aerobically. So you cannot respire anaerobically for long periods of time. Right? You'll do it for a very short period of time, and then basically your body will collapse and you'll stop doing your exercise until you can go back to respiring aerobically. So the glucose is broken down into lactic acid and energy. That's it. Okay, nothing else. Essentially, glucose, which is C6H12O6, is split in half. A lactic acid molecule has 3 carbons in it, and that releases some energy. Okay, so it's what we call the incomplete oxidation. Because there is no oxygen, we have incomplete oxidation. We get less energy, but it's enough to keep us going for a short period of time. So this is the word equation. Glucose, lactic acid, energy. Very simple. Okay. Again, glucose goes into cells. This process happens within the cells. And then the lactic acid is released back into the blood. It doesn't stay in the cells. It goes from there to the liver, which once we're back to respiring normally and oxygen levels have been resumed, we can then respire it properly back into carbon dioxide and water. But we have to remove it from the cell. And why do we have to remove it from the cell? We need to remove it from the cell because lactic acid is poisonous. Okay, it's a poisonous waste product. So we have to remove it from the cell because otherwise it will build up. Now, we're going to relate this to some of the work we've already done. So if there's too much acid in the cell, the pH is going to, remember, decrease and become more acidic. That will have a massive impact on enzymes. I hear you all shout at me. It will denature the enzymes in the cell. So that's why it's removed into the blood and taken to the liver, so that we can remove it from the cells. The cells can carry on functioning normally, but, as it says here, with much less energy. So we will only do this for a very short period of time, and then basically we will have to stop our strenuous exercise, and then we will have to breathe in and out, breathe deeply, break down that lactic acid and go back to respiring aerobically, and we will look at that in more detail next lesson. So why is it harmful? Well, basically it is harmful because it essentially stops the muscles from carrying out their job. It interferes with muscle contractions. Your muscles become fatigued. You might get a cramp and then you have to stop what you're doing and you have to rest. Okay, so it's essentially an inconvenience for the muscles, stops them carrying out their job, and they become fatigued. So yeast. Now yeast are an interesting organism. Remember, yeast are fungi. They're one of the larger of the fungi. They're not pathogenic, okay, unless they are. Sorry, there are some yeast that are pathogenic, but the yeast we're talking about today are not pathogenic. And they are what we call facultative anaerobes. They are happy respiring aerobically or anaerobically. It doesn't bother them at all. And we use this to our advantage. So when yeast respires anaerobically, it is a different reaction. They take the glucose and they do not break it down to lactic acid. They break it down into ethanol, and the byproduct of that is carbon dioxide. So they will take in glucose, they will respire it anaerobically without oxygen, and they will produce carbon dioxide and ethanol. And they can do this pretty much indefinitely. It doesn't really bother them. They're not that fussed. Okay. Now this process is called fermentation, alcoholic fermentation. And it releases a little bit of energy for them, and that energy they will use, but because they are very small microorganisms, they don't require a lot of energy, so it's enough to keep them going. Now we exploit this when we make bread and when we make alcohol. So in bread, we put the yeast in, we then cover it up, we keep it warm, the yeast respire, and the carbon dioxide bubbles make the yeast, makes the bread rise, and that's how we use it as a raising agent. In alcohol, we basically add something with sugar. So if we're going to make beer, we add wheat or barley. If we're going to make cider, we add apples. We add the yeast that ferments the sugars, turns the sugars into alcohol and carbon dioxide, and you get fizzy beer or fizzy cider or whatever it is, or grapes and make fizzy champagne, whatever it is you're trying to make. Okay, then if we distill some of those things, you end up getting your spirits, but that's a slightly different process. So finally for today, I would like you to either print out the sheet or copy it out, I don't mind which. You've got some statements there. I'd like you to put them into either the aerobic column or the anaerobic column. They're very straightforward. Question 2, when do our muscles respire anaerobically? Again, that's very straightforward. You just need to say, what we're doing. Why can't it go on indefinitely? Now, part C. It's a little tricky one, this one. Particularly the third part of this. So why do the following animals need to respire anaerobically for long periods of time? We're talking tapeworms. Tapeworms are parasites found in the digestive system. Mud burrowing worms. Worms that burrow in mud, fairly obviously. And a couple of ways, please note part 3. It says in the human body, almost all cells are within a microscopic distance of a capillary. Exceptions are the living cells which form the transparent lens of the eye. Suggest 2 ways these cells cope with the lack of oxygen. So what things might they do to cope with the lack of oxygen? And some of this relates back to some of the work we did earlier on in the year. Okay, thank you very much for listening.